the problem, once Nixon took us off any semblance of a gold standard, because of course, as you know, it wasn't really a gold standard.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, at that time, you have to remember that, I mean, I can remember I was in graduate school in the 60s, and it was pretty clear the Bretton Woods system was breaking down. And the big debate was, well, what do we do? And there were basically two schools of thought. One was we just go to floating rates. That's a great system, let the free market decide. And of course, everybody assumed that that would be done on the basis of trade balances. The idea that the capital markets would be dictating the exchange rates didn't really occur to anybody, let alone the idea there'd be all these traders with computers, et cetera, et cetera. It was just, you know, if floating rates, trade balances, it'll work out with the right exchange rate.
Like it did under the classical gold standard. You're talking about trade balances, not capital markets.
Right, exactly. And then the other argument, basic argument, was we'll raise the gold price.
Which is what Roosevelt did after the the boom and bust of the 20s and the early 30s. He just devalued the dollar.
I think that maybe $50, maybe $70. If they'd done something like that, then you would have had a link that would have lasted for some period of time. I mean, these things can never really be set in stone. I think going back to World War I, which basically resulted in so much debt being issued that the old parity of 2067 was really no longer sustainable. So Roosevelt, the devaluation was probably the right thing to do. The interesting thing is that his most severe monetary critic was James Warburg, who was the son of Paul Warburg, who was basically usually regarded as the father of the Federal Reserve, and was a hard money guy. And Warburg started out as, James Warburg that is, as Roosevelt's monetary advisor. He went to the London conference and so on and so forth. But his view was the devaluation was the right thing to do, and that's what was needed. But then once you went to $35 an ounce, you ought to get back on the gold standard as quickly as you could. Put that in place and then move forward from there. And that was not really what Roosevelt did. He played around with the price for a while, and Warburg didn't think that was appropriate, and he wrote this fairly scathing book, The Money Muddle, criticizing the Roosevelt policies. And of course, it was a break with Roosevelt. But then the war came along, and everybody got back together to fight the war.
Well, there were other priorities at that time.
Yeah, and the $35 lasted through the war and into the Bretton Woods system.
Yeah.
And as I say, but I can remember very well in these debates in the 60s, the argument floating rates versus raising the gold price. And at least to the two graduate schools I happened to be at during the time, usually it was 10 for floating rates and 1, frequently me, only 1, in favor of raising the gold price.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember those debates as well, because I was going through my economics program in college at the time, and it was a similar type of situation. You know, so many people were in favor of.
Well, the economists were
supposedly floating rates were the modern thing to do. Supposedly.
Yes, and economists were all in favor of floating rates, but remember, it was basically the only way we were going to finance the welfare state.
Yeah.
And at that time, it's kind of a free ride. I mean, you can go along issuing paper money if you do it at just a moderate rate for quite a while before you get into the kind of problem we're in today.
Yeah.
You know, that we could have postponed this problem if we'd been a little more cautious and issuing more debt, more money.
And
but
less promises.
At some point, I mean, this is just the history of paper money. Somebody today at the conference mentioned Andrew Dickson White's Fiat money inflation in France. And what he didn't say is why the book was written, because it was written as an essay to support the return to the gold standard after the Civil War. And he actually read it to, not in Congress, but to a fairly wide assortment of Congress persons and senators in support of the Resumption Act, which was the act to go back on the gold standard. I mean, but that's why he did it, and he used the assignats and revolutionary France as the example of what happens if you go to paper money. And I can remember there's some line in that book about Napoleon when he came to power after the French Revolution, saying, I will pay specie or I'll pay nothing. Yes. And putting France back on a gold standard, and despite Napoleon's defeat subsequently, France really on gold standard didn't suffer terribly badly.
Yeah, we just did a video for the Gold Money Foundation on this very point, fiat money inflation in France, and we actually used that quote from Napoleon, and they were on a gold standard from the time that he was assumed, the position of emperor in 1800 until 1914. It had a very stable currency.